The day my boss tried to erase me began with coffee stains and a fake smile. I was sitting in the glass conference room on the 26th floor of a Chicago office tower when he finally said the words he had been rehearsing for weeks. His name was Brandon Cole, but everyone called him Brad. He leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and told me that my position was being eliminated as part of a restructuring. He said the company appreciated my many years of service. He said it was not personal. He said I would land on my feet. I watched his lips move. I watched the rehearsed concern on his face. Inside, I felt nothing but a strange, steady clarity. My name is Lauren Parker. I am 48 years old. I had given 15 years of my life to Cole Stratton and Pierce, a mid-sized marketing and branding firm that helped turn small businesses into national names. What Brad did not know, as he delivered his little speech, was that I had known this moment was coming for months. What he also did not know was that by the time he slid the severance packet across the table toward me, the one with my name already printed on the front, his biggest client had already signed a contract with me. Personally, he thought he was ending my career. He had no idea he was lighting the fuse on his own. I did not cry, I did not argue, I did not beg. I simply folded my hands on the table and told him that before we discussed anything, we should make sure he had checked his email. His smile faltered for the first time that morning. That was the moment when the story really began to turn. Because Brad thought he was the one pulling the strings. The truth was very different. When I first walked into Cole Stratton and Pierce, the office did not have glass walls or espresso machines or a view of the Chicago River. Back then, we occupied half a floor in an older building that smelled faintly of printer ink and burned coffee. The break room had mismatched mugs and a microwave that needed a firm slap on the side to start. I was 33, newly divorced, hungry for a fresh start. The original founder, Thomas Stratton, interviewed me in a cluttered office overflowing with sample packaging and old campaigns. He had kind eyes, a loud laugh, and a habit of forgetting his own meeting times. He told me he needed someone who could bring order to chaos, someone who did not scare easily, someone who could turn creative storms into smooth operations. I told him I could do that. For the next decade, I did exactly that. While the creative directors brainstormed and argued and threw sticky notes at walls, I built systems. I created timelines and checklists. I negotiated with printers and media buyers. I remembered the birthdays of every important client. I knew which designer worked best under pressure and which copywriter needed an extra day. When Thomas wanted to pitch a national chain of home goods stores, I stayed up all night in the office to help him prepare. When the pitch succeeded, he called me the spine of the company. He meant it as a compliment. We grew from 10 employees to over 80. We moved into a new building with a lobby that smelled like polished stone and money. We put our logo on the window. Somewhere along the way, Thomas's health began to fail. His heart could not keep up with the pace he had set for himself. He retired and sold his controlling stake to a private equity group based in New York. That was when Brad arrived. Brad had perfect hair, perfect suits, and an expensive watch that he loved to display when he gestured. He was in his early 30s, with a business degree, a confidence that filled every room, and a belief that anyone over 40 was part of the past. He called me old school to my face. He meant it as an insult. At first, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. New leadership meant new ideas. I had survived transitions before. I told myself he would see the value in institutional memory and steady hands. Instead, I watched as he started to remake the company in his own image. He installed standing desks and neon signs in the open workspace. He ordered craft beer for Friday afternoons and put a ping-pong table in the break room. He hired a social media director half my age who called everyone bestie and wore sneakers that cost more than my entire first paycheck at the firm. The office looked younger overnight. I did not mind the decor. What I minded was the shift in how he looked at me. He stopped inviting me to high-level meetings. He started sending his new favorite, A project manager named Tyler who wore slim-cut suits and talked about disruption. He asked Tyler questions he used to ask me. He asked me to take notes. He referred to our longest-running client, a national chain called Harbor Lane Market, as Lauren's account with a dismissive little shrug, as if they were some small neighborhood bakery instead of the client that made up almost one-third of our annual revenue. One afternoon, I heard him tell a junior manager that we needed less mother energy in operations and more speed and fire. He did not know I was standing in the doorway. The words landed in my gut like a stone. I went back to my office. I closed the door. I sat down and stared at the framed photo on my shelf of the old team, the one with Thomas and the first 10 of us, packed together and laughing. That was the moment I stopped hoping Brad would value what I brought to the company. That was the moment I began to pay close attention. When I first walked into Cole, Stratton, and Pierce, the office did not have glass walls or espresso machines or a view of the Chicago River. Back then, we occupied half a floor in an older building that smelled faintly of printer ink and burned coffee. The break room had mismatched mugs and a microwave that needed a firm slap on the side to start. I was 33, newly divorced, hungry for a fresh start. The original founder, Thomas Stratton, interviewed me in a cluttered office overflowing with sample packaging and old campaigns. He had kind eyes, a loud laugh, and a habit of forgetting his own meeting times. He told me he needed someone who could bring order to chaos, someone who did not scare easily, someone who could turn creative storms into smooth operations. I told him I could do that. For the next decade, I did exactly that. While the creative directors brainstormed and argued and threw sticky notes at walls, I built systems, I created timelines and checklists, I negotiated with printers and media buyers, I remembered the birthdays of every important client. I knew which designer worked best under pressure and which copywriter needed an extra day. When Thomas wanted to pitch a national chain of home goods stores, I stayed up all night in the office to help him prepare. When the pitch succeeded, he called me the spine of the company. He meant it as a compliment. We grew from 10 employees to over 80. We moved into a new building with a lobby that smelled like polished stone and money. We put our logo on the window. Somewhere along the way, Thomas's health began to fail. His heart could not keep up with the pace he had set for himself. He retired and sold his controlling stake to a private equity group based in New York. That was when Brad arrived. Brad had perfect hair, perfect suits, and an expensive watch that he loved to display when he gestured. He was in his early 30s, with a business degree, a confidence that filled every room, and a belief that anyone over 40 was part of the past. He called me old school to my face. He meant it as an insult. At first, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. New leadership meant new ideas. I had survived transitions before. I told myself he would see the value in institutional memory and steady hands. Instead, I watched as he started to remake the company in his own image. He installed standing desks and neon signs in the open workspace. He ordered craft beer for Friday afternoons and put a ping-pong table in the break room. He hired a social media director half my age who called everyone bestie and wore sneakers that cost more than my entire first paycheck at the firm. The office looked younger overnight. I did not mind the decor. What I minded was the shift in how he looked at me. He stopped inviting me to high-level meetings. He started sending his new favorite, a project manager named Tyler who wore slim-cut suits and talked about disruption. He asked Tyler questions he used to ask me. He asked me to take notes. He referred to our longest-running client, a national chain called Harbor Lane Market, as Lauren's account with a dismissive little shrug, as if they were some small neighborhood bakery instead of the client that made up almost one-third of our annual revenue. One afternoon, I heard him tell a junior manager that we needed less mother energy in operations and more speed and fire. He did not know I was standing in the doorway. The words landed in my gut like a stone. I went back to my office. I closed the door. I sat down and stared at the framed photo on my shelf of the old team, the one with Thomas and the first 10 of us, packed together and laughing. That was the moment I stopped hoping Brad would value what I brought to the company. That was the moment I began to pay close attention. The first person I reached out to was not a lawyer. It was Harbor Lane Market. Their vice president of marketing, a sharp woman named Renee Carter, had been one of my favorite clients for years. We had sat side by side in strategy sessions, traded stories about our teenagers, and celebrated successful campaigns over black coffee in hotel conference rooms. I called her under the pretense of checking in on an upcoming seasonal promotion. She listened, asked a few questions, and then asked if everything was all right on our end. I hesitated for only a moment. Then I told her the truth. I told her that the company was changing, and not in ways that made our work better. I told her that my access to key decisions had been limited. I told her that the new leadership seemed more interested in flashy presentations than in consistent execution. I did not complain. I did not badmouth Brad directly. I simply described what I had seen. Renee was quiet for a long moment. Then she told me that she appreciated my honesty. She said she had noticed a change in the tone of recent meetings. She said some of the new faces seemed more interested in impressing her than in listening. Then she said something that changed everything. She told me that Harbor Lane had been considering bringing more of their marketing coordination in-house. She said they were thinking of hiring a director-level consultant to build that internal function. She asked, very calmly, whether I would ever consider leaving the agency side. My heart started to pound. I did not answer right away. Instead, I told her I would need some time to think. After we ended the call, I sat in my office and stared out at the city. I was afraid. I had been at the same company for 15 years. I knew every process, every quirk, every shortcut. Starting over felt like stepping off a cliff. But staying put, under a leader who was slowly pushing me to the edge, felt more dangerous. That evening, I contacted an employment attorney that a friend had recommended. We met in a quiet office decorated with framed degrees and photos of hiking trails. I laid everything out. The review, the comments, the pattern of exclusion, the increased workload without support, the hints about retirement, the way my core client was being courted by someone who cut me out of conversations. She listened carefully, took notes, and finally leaned back. She told me that what I described looked very much like a strategy to force out an older, higher-paid employee. She said the documentation I had started to gather was wise. She advised me to keep doing exactly that. She also reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten. Because I had joined the company so early, I held a meaningful amount of stock options that had fully vested the previous year. I also had a defined benefit in the company's retirement plan that would pay out more generously if I stayed until my 50th birthday. Suddenly, Brad's timing made sense. If he could push me out before I reached that milestone, the company would save a significant amount of money. I went home that night and sat at my tiny kitchen table in my 2-bedroom condo. My daughter, Emma, was away at college. The apartment was quiet. I opened my laptop and wrote a list. By the time I closed it, I had a plan. First, I called Renee and told her I was interested in exploring the in-house role she had mentioned. Over the next few weeks, we spoke in more detail. She put me through a formal interview process. Nothing was guaranteed, but she was clear that I was a top candidate. Second, I continued to document everything. I saved emails that showed I was performing at a high level. I printed calendar invites that showed I had been cut out of meetings I used to attend. I kept a notebook of comments Brad made about my age, about my supposed resistance to change, about needing fresh blood in leadership. Each entry had a date, a time, and the names of anyone who might have overheard. Third, I requested copies of all my previous performance reviews from Human Resources, including the older ones that praised my adaptability and leadership. The HR manager, a woman named Carla who had started around the same time I did, gave me a long, searching look when I made the request. She printed the documents without comment. She knew something, I could see it. As I left her office, She walked me to the door and lowered her voice. She told me that, off the record, I should keep taking care of myself. She said change was not always kind to the people who had built the foundation. Her eyes were kind and tired. That was all she said. 2 months later, I got the call from Renee. Harbor Lane Market wanted to hire me as their director of brand operations. The offer included a generous salary, stock in the company, and the chance to build an internal team from scratch. It also included a signing bonus that would more than cover my legal fees. I stared at the email with my heart pounding, then forwarded it to my attorney. She wrote back within the hour and told me to accept. I did. We agreed that I would start in 6 weeks. That gave me just enough time. Time to see whether Brad would actually push me, or whether I would simply walk away. He chose to push. 2 weeks before my planned resignation date, he scheduled a meeting with me for a Friday morning. The subject line on the invitation read, "Role Alignment." My attorney saw it as soon as I forwarded it. She advised me to be calm, to say little, and to bring a printed copy of my resignation letter, already signed and dated for the previous day. That detail would matter for reasons she explained carefully. On that Friday morning, I walked into the glass conference room, wearing my favorite navy blazer and a pair of heels that made me feel taller than I was. Brad sat at the head of the table, a stack of papers in front of him. Tyler occupied a seat near the door, eyes bright with something that looked a lot like anticipation. Brad smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. He told me that the company was moving in a new direction. He said they needed leaders who matched his vision. He said my role was being eliminated. He slid the severance packet across the table and told me that if I signed it, I would receive a modest payment and a neutral reference. He added that there would be no need to involve attorneys or create drama. He had no idea that my attorney had drafted the resignation letter I pulled from my folder. He had no idea that, according to the date printed at the top of that letter, I had already resigned effective the day before his little performance. He had no idea that a different set of attorneys, those representing Harbor Lane Market, had already delivered a termination notice for their agency contract to his inbox at that exact moment. That was when I asked him to check his email. For a few long seconds, Brad did not move. He kept his eyes on me, as if waiting for me to crack. The silence stretched between us. The glass walls of the conference room reflected our faces, his composed mask starting to slip, mine set in calm lines I had practiced in the mirror. Then he sighed and picked up his phone. I watched his expression change as he read. First came confusion, then a flash of disbelief, then a slow, dawning horror. He opened his laptop and began typing quickly. His jaw tightened. I knew what he was seeing. Harbor Lane Market had sent a formal notice ending their contract with the firm. They had cited a desire to bring operations in-house. They had thanked the company for previous years of service, which they credited in large part to my leadership. They had also notified him that I had accepted a senior role with them and that they expected a professional handoff of all materials under my supervision. He looked up at me. He asked what I had done. I told him, very calmly, that I had taken another job. I told him that I had submitted my resignation to Human Resources the day before. I told him that, as of that moment, I was no longer his employee. He sputtered that this was unacceptable. He said he had planned a transition. He said I was blindsiding him. I reminded him that he had just tried to fire me under the pretense of restructuring. He turned to Tyler and demanded to know whether anyone in the account team had been aware of this. Tyler shook his head, white-faced. I reached into my folder again and placed a second envelope on the table. This one contained a letter from my attorney, addressed to the company. It outlined my concerns about age discrimination and retaliatory behavior. It described the suspicious timing of my negative performance review after years of positive ones. It listed the comments he had made about my age and the need for fresh blood. It referenced the documentation I had collected, all neatly organized. It invited the company to have their legal counsel contact mine before taking any further adverse actions against me. Brad did not open the envelope. He did not need to. He knew. His face flushed an angry red. He accused me of plotting against him. I told him that I had simply protected myself when it became clear that he intended to push me out. I told him that, unlike him, I valued preparation over theatrics. He stood up so quickly that his chair tipped backward. He said I was disloyal. I thought about the nights I had slept on the office couch to meet deadlines. I thought about the weekends I had spent answering client calls while he posed for photos on social media. I thought about the way he had mocked my loyalty as mother energy while building a plan to erase me before my pension kicked in. Then I stood up as well. I told him that loyalty was not the same as self-sacrifice. I told him that I owed him nothing. He tried one more angle. He threatened to badmouth me to future employers. He said the industry was small. He implied that he could make my name toxic. I could see the fear flicker behind his eyes as he spoke. Bullies often speak loudest when they have lost control. I reminded him that Harbor Lane Market already knew me. I reminded him that other clients had noticed the changes in his leadership. I reminded him that reputations travel both ways. Then I picked up my handbag, walked to the door, and told him that I needed to finish cleaning out my office. Tyler watched me go with wide eyes. I wondered briefly whether he saw his own future in Brad's face. As I walked down the hall, employees glanced up from their desks. Some clearly knew something was happening. A few gave me small, supportive nods. Supportive. Carla from Human Resources stepped out of her office as I approached. She looked at the envelope in my hand and the expression on my face. She nodded once. She told me that she had already processed my resignation and that my benefits were secure. Later that afternoon, as I carried the last box of personal items to my car in the parking garage, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It was Renee. She told me that the board at Harbor Lane had been fully briefed on my situation. She told me that they admired the way I had handled myself. She told me that they were excited to have me join their leadership team. When I drove out of that garage, the building's mirrored windows reflected the late afternoon sun. For the first time in years, I felt light. In the months that followed, the ripples from that day kept expanding. At Harbor Lane Market, I threw myself into my new role. I built a team of operations specialists who understood both creative work and logistics. We created smoother review processes, more precise timelines, and better communication between internal departments. I brought in some of the younger staff I had mentored at the agency, giving them a healthier environment to grow. We worked hard, but the work felt different. There was no ping-pong table, no craft beer, no neon slogans on the wall. There was something more valuable. There was respect. At first, I tried not to pay attention to what was happening back at Cole Stratton and Pierce. I told myself that focusing on them would only slow my own progress. But news has a way of traveling. Former coworkers reached out, old clients called, industry gossip floated through conferences and networking events. I learned that losing Harbor Lane Market had hit the agency hard. Other clients began to ask questions. They had heard rumors about how long-term staff were being treated. They had heard that the founder's vision was being replaced by something colder and more short-sighted. Some stayed, some left. Over time, more accounts shifted away. I also learned that the private equity group in New York did not appreciate surprises. They called for an internal review. An outside firm examined the pattern of departures, the performance of key accounts, and the leadership decisions that had led to the loss of a major client. They interviewed staff members at all levels. Carla from Human Resources spoke truthfully. So did others. Brad's age-based comments surfaced, not only in my notes but in the recollections of younger managers who had cringed at them and older employees who had been hurt. The performance review he had used as the foundation for his attempt to remove me did not look good when placed alongside a decade of positive reviews and recent client praise. There were questions about the fairness of his decisions. There were also questions about his judgment. 6 months after I left, I heard that he had been removed from his position as chief executive officer. The official statement cited a need for new strategic direction. Quiet conversations suggested that the investors had lost confidence in his leadership. Tyler stayed on for a while, then left to join a different agency. The company did not collapse. It restructured again. A new leader, someone with more experience and less ego, stepped in. They reached out to me, politely, to ask whether I would consider consulting for them on improving internal culture. I thought about the old photo still in my home office, the one with Thomas and the original team. I thought about the years of my life that had been bound up in that company. I thought about the people still there, who did good work. After a long, careful conversation with my attorney and with Renee, I agreed to consult on a limited basis. Not because I owed the company anything, because I cared about the work and the people who did it. One afternoon, as I sat in a conference room at the agency, now with fewer neon signs and a new sense of humility in the air, I walked past the glass wall of the office that used to belong to Brad. It was empty. The new chief executive officer, a woman in her early 50s with a background in both finance and creative direction, had chosen a different office closer to the open workspace. I felt no triumph as I passed that empty glass box. I felt something quieter. Relief. I had not destroyed Brad. He had done that to himself. I had simply refused to let him take me down with him. On a cool autumn evening in Chicago, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea and my laptop. Emma had just sent me a photo from her college campus, grinning with her friends, holding a stack of textbooks. She wrote that she was proud of me. She said she had told one of her professors about what I had done and that they had called me an example of strategic resilience. I smiled at the phrase. I thought about the younger women on my new team, watching how I navigated conflict. I thought about the older employees at the agency who had thanked me quietly for not going quietly. I thought about all the people, in all the offices, who were being pushed aside by leaders who saw them as numbers rather than as human beings. I did not have a magic formula to give them, but I had a story. In that story, the hero did not win by shouting the loudest or by burning everything down. She won by paying attention, by trusting her instincts when something felt wrong, by documenting the truth carefully and calmly, by building relationships based on respect so that when someone tried to erase her, the people who really mattered knew better. She won by understanding that her value did not come from a title on a business card or a desk in a corner office. It came from who she was and what she had built. As the city lights flickered on across the river, I opened a blank document and began to outline a workshop I wanted to create for women in corporate roles. I wanted to teach them how to protect themselves, how to read the early signs, how to build safety nets, how to walk away when staying meant betrayal of self. I wanted to tell them that there is power in preparation, that there is dignity in refusing to play the victim in someone else's story, that sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply building a life that no one can take from you. I thought back to that morning in the glass conference room, when Brad told me that my position was being eliminated. He had believed that was the moment my story ended. In reality, it was the moment I took the pen back into my own hand. And I intend to keep writing.